Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little big guy. This is the Boos Blades Aero. And note that that's spelled A-E-R-O rather than the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. Not that kind of arrow, the other one. Anyways, let's do a quick little size comparison with this guy. Right here is your Grimsmo Rask. So you can see this is not a small knife, although it seems like it could be on the surface here. Grimsmo Norseman. And let's see here, Spyderco PM2, doing some atypical size comparisons today, but why not? Spyderco Delica, so this is beefy, absolutely 100%. Of course, the Ontario Rat number 1 and the Rat number 2. I'm sorry, that's the 2, this is the 1, I always screw that up. But anyways, the entire length of the blade without the extra choil here is about equivalent on the Aero. And let's see here, one larger knife, the ZT0452CF. So there you go. That's the size of this little big guy here. I want to thank very much for sending this guy along. Actually, the maker, William Boos. Honestly, it takes stones to send me gear, because I tend to be a little bit critical. And he actually asked me every time a maker offers to send me gear, I send them a form email saying, you know, I may call this good, I may call it great, I may call it ugly, I may even call it junk. And he said, you know, all he wants is an honest review. And so that's great. He wants the honest, good, bad, great, and ugly, and here it is. Then one final note. Unlike most of them you buy at the factory, this little guy is running on ceramic bearings right now. I swapped them in during the disassembly video, and it does smooth things out a little bit, but everything I have to say about the knife is still applicable to your bone stock sort of configuration. So let's go on ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of this very interesting little knife. So on the good side, first off, this guy has a very nice clip. I'm a big fan of it because not only is it relatively tall, allowing the fabric of your pocket to get in there, as well as with a nice big ramp, it's also got some spring to it, and it's also got some art to it. I mean, you can see here, if we look at this clip, that it is nicely chamfered, kind of wrangled or whatever the heck, down into the body of the knife. It's a very aerodynamic design. And, you know, it makes what could be a very clunky clip on this knife really blend in nicely. So I'm a fan of it in a couple of ways. I also like the fact that he went with the interior screws for it. You can see them if I shed a little light on the subject here. Inside there, those two screws are what are providing what are holding the clip down. So there you go. Nice little detail there. Next thing is the blade. The blade is a little bit on the thicker side. You can see it's about the same thickness as your 452 or your PM2. However, if you're trying to get it to go this long and to slowly kind of taper off, it needs to start off thick. Whether this would be better with a shorter blade, I don't know. But nonetheless, the thickness isn't so bad, especially given the grind on it. This is still pretty thin behind the edge, and it still does cut with authority. There's no concern really about the slicing capability of this knife, especially as we get out towards the tip here where it's very, very thin, which is just nice overall. I like this blade. I'll also say that the steel is great. It's 20 CV steel, which is in the same class as your REM 390, your 204P. Basically, it's one of the best steels out there. No concerns there. The sharpening choil on it is nice, and I do love the fact that there's a Warncliffe blade here. I'm a big fan of Warnies for EDC, and this is a nice one. Even though it's got a little bit of belly, I think it is just spectacular overall for the blade. I'm a big fan of this blade. Next thing is the detent on this knife is great. I mean, absolutely 100%. It's got enough. It's hard enough that it flips every freaking time in any angle, any desire, and it feels great to flip. I love flipping this knife 100%. It is also good, I'll mention, for a middle finger flipping. This big hole on the blade allows you to get a fingernail in there and pop it open in that way, which is kind of a separately satisfying thing. So if that's your shtick and you'd rather not use the flipper tab, that is a very acceptable way to open this knife. And the detent is dialed in nicely there. If it were too much harder, the detent that is, I think that you might lose that. But this is in that great place where it's good for both. Nicely done there. The construction on this guy is honestly simple and excellent. There are 2 screws here. That's it. And so to take the knife apart, you use the same size bit in both screws. Just saying, that's a wonderful thing. And by the way, this is in fact the same size bit. It's an optical illusion. It really doesn't look that way because of the large collar on this one. But these are taking the exact same Torx bit. So Anyways, beside the point, but the construction on this guy is relatively straightforward and pretty excellent overall. You saw the disassembly video was pretty easy, and I like that very much. It's a simple thing done well. Always a way to get into my heart, so to speak. Then finally, of course, there are details. Like I mentioned already, the milling on the clip is kind of a beautiful thing as well. There is the internal lock bar relief cut. So you can see here that there's a lock bar cut out, and that it's all on the inside, and so that lets the back side look just as smooth as the front side. It's a nice little thing, and I'm glad he went there. There is some nice jimping on this, and it is actually very nice jimping. You can see here that not only is it, there were flat portions here, so it's not too jagged, but even there's a chamfer along the side of these flat portions, and it just makes for a really neat surface right up there. Very nicely done in that way. The hole matches the handle very exactly. You can see here that when the knife is deployed, with the exception of this little area up here, the whole thing just slopes in beautifully. I mean, it looks like the hole is reclining in its own little easy chair here. It's a stupid thing to mention in a review, but at some level it does bring me joy to see that nice little swoopy alignment here. The lines on this are just freaking beautiful. The back spacer on here is nice, and you can see that they've actually got a little, I'll see if I can highlight this. Here, I'll take the blade out of the way so you can see it more clearly, but you can see it's got a nice little cutout for the blade because the blade does come fairly close to that back spacer, and that little cutout allows the blade to not touch at all, which is nice. And then finally, I do actually like this blade hole a fair amount. I'm not really super concerned about hard use, high speed, low drag in this knife, but it's very nicely done. It's nicely chamfered. It is just nice, absolutely. And so there were great details on this knife. To summarize the good, it's got a simple and pretty excellent construction to it. It's very, the intent is very, very good, great even. It's got a nice blade, a nice clip, and a great lock bar insert. So let's talk about what's great about this knife. What's truly great about this knife for me is the design. This knife is really, really, really pretty. It's very aerodynamic, it's very pretty, and to me it scratches an itch that's not really being scratched by other designers. I've heard a lot of comparisons to like Gavco knives. The thing is, Gavco knives tend to be more angular and, I don't know, for lack of a better term, lizardy. They've kind of got that feeling of, whereas this is all smooth curves all throughout. And, another comparison might be the Maffione Monroe Sigil. Actually, it's just Monroe, but still, because it's got that larger blade cut out. But again, this is much more smooth, much more aerodynamic. This is melted in a way that I've not seen any other knives. And the result is something that looks deeply futuristic. It's got this weird mix between sports car and murder weapon that is weirdly appealing to me. It's like something a Ferrari designer would send back through time to give to a robotic assassin. One of my viewers on the Instagram, Blair Vane, said, if George Jetson carried a knife, this would be it. And I love it, because that is kind of the itch it's scratching for me. It looks fast. Even when this is sitting on the table, it looks like it's moving around. And I love this design so much. I look at this and it's just like, wow, that's pretty. And so for me, what is great about this knife absolutely is the aesthetics. The design of this is just A+. I love it. So there you go. Let's talk about the bad. So on the bad side, first off, this is a murdery knife. We got to be real about that. It's long and it's very, very pointy. That said, it's a very beautiful kind of murdery, and I think for a lot of people it's going to turn heads in terms of art rather than in terms of, oh my God, he's going to kill me. And I think that's kind of a beautiful thing, but this is still something you're going to have to consider. It's long and it's very, very pointy, and it does have the potential to scare some people depending on the people you're around. So keep that in mind. Next thing is that I don't really love the blade finish on this guy. You're looking at a kind of a blasted stonewash sort of finish. And the thing is, that's a fine finish, I guess. It makes things a little more vulnerable to corrosion, that is, and corruption. Who knows? Maybe this is taking payments or something. But nonetheless, that's a little bit ugly, and especially here on this blade, which is so clean otherwise, to have this kind of permanently dirty finish, it bugs me a little bit. That's a matter of taste, but I would love to have seen something a little bit more polished or satin-like on this knife instead. Not the end of the world, and it's something I'm considering for this guy on my own here, but it is something to keep in mind. Next thing to me is that the price is definitely up there. You're looking at about $420 for this actual knife. He's got other configurations and different colors and things like that. I probably should have put that in the good, but whatever it is, that is a lot of cash, absolutely 100%. And, it's not completely out of line in your mid-tech small batch production knife market. And I think he's kind of earned it in a lot of ways with this pretty unique design, with the really excellent action. And, the overall construction is very, very nice, but that is still just a lot of money. For a lot of people, that price is going to put it just out of contention altogether. Next thing is that, for me at least personally, this knife is just too damn long. I mean, this is a knife that is someplace between 3.5 and 3.75 inches, depending on exactly where you're measuring from and how angry the police officer is with you. And so that's kind of a long, long knife. I mean, here, I'll be a little more specific than that, but if we're looking here, we can see in inches. If you go from the very edge of the blade, you're damn near 4 inches, 3.75 here. This is pretty intense in terms of length. And I really do wish that this knife were a little bit smaller. In fact, that was my first impression taking this out of the box, was just like, holy crap, this is bigger than it looked. Because seriously, if you put it next to a known knife, it suddenly gets a lot bigger. And that's kind of interesting. I kind of do wish that this were in a 3-inch, maybe 3.25 range. That would make it a little bit more interesting. It would make it smaller overall, and just, I think it'd be a little more compelling. Not a huge deal, and that's a matter of taste, but for me, bugs me a little. Next thing is another little thing, but the clip for me is a little bit of an ergonomic hotspot right along the sides here. It's not a big deal, and it does serve to fill the hands a little bit, but in some grips, the clip can be a little bit uncomfortable. And considering the rest of the knife is very ergonomic, I kind of wish that this were rounded off a little bit more rather than having these flat edges. Not a huge deal. And I'm also not a huge fan of the clip finish. I would have liked to have seen a similar finish to the body of it, just so it blends in a little better or something like that. Okay, now we're getting out of nitpick territory and getting into some more substantial issues. And it's probably promising that I've spent this long in nitpicky land. Let's see here. Oh, the over-travel stop on this guy is a little bit weird. I kind of showed that off in the disassembly, but it turns out that the part of the over-travel stop that actually stops it is very, very close to the lock face itself. And so, I don't know, I kind of like the feeling of having a tab of metal that will hit on something rather than the lock face itself hitting on the scale. That seems really weird to me, and I don't quite get why they made that over-travel stop in that way. Next thing that will be a bigger issue for a lot of people is the tip on this guy is very, very thin. I mean, seriously, if we compare this to the tip on the Delica, which is also fairly thin and a little bit vulnerable, this is even thinner. Compare it to the tip on, say, your 452, this guy is thinner. And, definitely compared to, let's see here, even compared to your Spyderco PM2, the tip is very, very thin here. So if you're a hard use sort of person, you run the risk of turning this guy into a Tonto blade a little bit more quickly than you might have expected. I'm not I'm not personally concerned because that's not really my scene. But if you're a hard user, this might not be the best choice for you. Moving along there. Another issue for me that bothers me is that there's no real good cutout for lock bar access here. It's okay, you can kind of push your finger in there, but I really would have liked to have seen some sort of a scalloping, it's harder to see on the carbon fiber, but this is what it's where there's a little bit of a cutout on the other side of the scale here, which allows you to get your thumb down into this territory. It's not the end of the world, certainly, and I can get this knife closed and open pretty straightforwardly, but still, I'd like to have seen some little bit of relief in there for the finger. Not a huge deal, though. A much huger deal for me is that this is back heavy. If you hold the knife, the point of natural balance is about here-ish, someplace in this realm, and it doesn't quite feel right. It's also relatively heavy. This knife is, for all of its lightweight looks, it is surprisingly up there. You're looking at 4.5 ounces, and that's partly just because this is big with big chunks of titanium, but both of these things would have been helped significantly by including some interior milling. These are just solid chunks of titanium, whereas this could have been milled out a little bit on the inside, both to knock down the weight and to move the balance a little bit more forward. This is the Aero knife. I mean, seriously, Aero is in the name, and so it sounds like it really should be a featherweight knife, but it really isn't. And again, I talked to the maker about this, and he apparently did try to get the interior milling but had some trouble with the factory, I don't know, on Costa. But whatever it is, I really wish that that milling had been in there, both to lighten the knife and to change its balance a little bit. And then finally, that kind of brings another issue, which is that it seems like in a couple of cases here, there were some cost cuts made in order to keep the price under that point, the interior milling being the big one of them. But the blade finish as well, that's more subjective. And this kind of gets to a larger idea I've been batting around a lot, which is that generally speaking, if you're making a knife and you cut a corner in order to cut the cost, it tends to come back and bite you. I would have much rather, I was just saying that the price is high at $420, but if it would have made the price $450 to do the interior milling, I think this would have been a much better knife at $450 with that little bit of milling, or with the ceramic bearings from the factory, although I gather he tried to get those put in anyways. And so, unfortunately, there were a couple of cut corners on here that meant the cut cost, but ended up cutting quality, and that's never a stellar idea. So that's your bad. The cutting cost by cutting corners is always a dangerous game. It's a little back heavy. It's a little heavy. There's no cutout for lock bar access. The tip is fragile. Not a big fan of how the over travel was done. The clip can be a hot spot. I don't love the finish. The blade, I don't love the finish of either. The price is definitely up there, and it's just too damn long overall. Let's talk about the ugly here. Okay, there are two ugly things here. The first one is the tip of the blade is very, very close to the edge of the knife. This is because the blade is too damn long already. I mentioned this previously, but you can see it's right up there at the edge. It's not going to cut you as you run your finger along the side here, but at the same time, if you push your finger at the top of this, you are going to hit blade, at least with my relatively small fingers. And I've actually a couple of occasions when I kind of put the knife into my pocket and then use a finger to push it the rest of the way in, wound up a little pinprick of blood on there because the edge of this, the tip of this knife kind of pricked me a little bit. And that's, to me, that's pretty ugly. I really wish that he'd gone with a very slightly shorter blade length. Just kind of tapered this down a little bit or something like that so it's a little bit further away from the edge of the scales. That, to me, is a design flaw, and it's something that's going to need to be fixed in future versions. It's probably not going to be an issue for everybody. If you've got big, thick calluses so that your fingers don't bend at all, you'll be okay, but for me, at least, it's the thing I like least about this knife, and it makes the knife just a little bit scary in the pocket when it doesn't need to be. The other ugly is from the factory. I showed this in the disassembly video, but the tent ball path and the bearing races were not masked off before they did this freaking blasted stonewash finish on the blade. I hate the finish already, but I hate even more that they were so lazy that they didn't even mask off the action. And this means that the knife is a lot less smooth than it could be. I mean, listen to this. You can hear the blade scraping along this blasted finish. It's already way better since I got it. Just repeatedly going back and forth like this over and over and over again and trying to polish that down a little bit, it is much, much better than it could have been otherwise, but still ugly. Terrible, terrible, freaking terrible. How did the factory in a knife this expensive not think to mask that off first? You're putting an abrasive finish on there. The last thing you want for your bearings is an abrasive area. Ugly, freaking ugly. So, this will smooth out over time, absolutely, and the action is still pretty damn smooth by most accounts, but it's a missed opportunity, and it's something that the factory really should have done right the first time. So that's the other ugly thing. So there's your ugly. The factory got really lazy as they blasted the blade, and then the blade tip is borderline exposed depending on the size of your finger, and could give you a little bit of a prick there, and that's a little ugly. So let's talk final conclusions. Final conclusions, look, I love this design very, very much. I think it's got some very nice materials. It's simple construction. It's intelligently thought out. I mean, a lot of this is really, really well done. And couple that with the great materials and the fact that it is just so freaking beautiful, it makes me want to cry. And that's absolutely just a question of aesthetics, and people may disagree with me, but I love the look of this knife so damn much. It's shallow, but it just brings me joy. I love so much of this design, but it's also kind of a shame because I feel like this knife was let down by the production process. And talking with the maker, I get the impression he would agree with me. The knife he wanted to make is a little different than the knife that emerged from production. I think he wanted the internal milling, but it just didn't work out that way. He wanted the ceramic bearings, some other little issues, and the freaking lack of masking here is just, oh Oh, pox on the freaking production company for that. That's so damned ugly. Not really a pox. I wish you all health and whatnot. But nonetheless, so it's frustrating in that way because this knife is about 85% as good as it could have easily been had some of those things been addressed. But even with that, the design is just really, really nice and offsets that. And even with the missed potential, this is a knife that after I got it on loan from the maker, I paid him the price and bought the knife for myself because it is just really, really nice. It's unique, it's different, it's pretty. The way I don't know if it's going to stick around forever in my collection, and I do badly want to try refinishing the blade, doing something better than they did. But nonetheless, it's not a knife that I wanted to send back. It's something that I find so attractive that I wanted to keep it. So, I mean, final conclusions on the knife. Well, more abstractly, this Boos guy is a maker to watch, 100%, because he's saying some great stuff is in the pipeline, and my impression is that all the issues I see with the knife, he sees with the knife. And that's a beautiful thing. And if this is one of his early efforts, then by God, his later work's gonna be great. But the Aero itself, the knife that's sitting on my table, made in the way that it is still a very, very, very nice knife. It's got some frustrations. Some of those are addressable. But with a few production tweaks, this knife, especially with a slightly shorter tip, this knife is just a shining freaking gem in the waiting. It's an unpolished gem, if you will. So there you go. That's the conclusion. I like the knife a lot. Oh, is it pretty? Boos is a make it to watch, and with a couple of tweaks, this is gonna be a shining freaking gem, but even as it is, it's pretty damn good. So there you go. I hope this was interesting to you, and at the very least, you got to stare at this for a little while, which I think is a beautiful thing, and that you have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of the day, and that the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune do not cause you any trouble with your afternoon. Bye now.